Most people assume they would just know if someone else was using their account. In my opinion, that assumption is wrong more often than people think, because the most common unauthorized access is not dramatic. It is quiet, occasional, and easy to overlook. Today, I am not going to give you a list of obvious warning signs like strange emails. I want to show you the actual tools built into these platforms that tell you, with certainty, who else is logged in. This video will not walk you through accessing anyone else's account. It will show you how to check your own accounts using features that already exist and are completely legal to use. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Point 1. Why unauthorized access is often invisible. Let us start with why this problem is so easy to miss in the first place. What most people underestimate is that someone using your account without permission does not necessarily change anything you would notice. They are not always deleting your data or posting strange content. Often, they are just quietly watching, reading, or using the service in the background, which means there is no obvious red flag pointing you toward the problem. Here is a real-life type of example. Someone shares a streaming password with a friend years ago. That friend shares it with someone else, and eventually there are several unknown devices logged in that the original account owner has no idea about. Nothing looks broken. The account still works fine for the actual owner, but someone else has been quietly using it the entire time. What I personally think makes this even harder to notice is that most of these platforms are designed for convenience first, not security awareness. They rarely, if ever, proactively notify you about a new device logging in, unless it triggers an unusual pattern like a login from a completely different country. A slow, gradual expansion of access, one extra device here, one extra person there, almost never triggers any kind of automatic alert. In my opinion, this is exactly why relying on "I would notice if something was wrong" is not a real security strategy. You need to actually check, not just assume. What I personally think makes this problem worse over time is how normal it has become to share logins casually within families and friend groups, especially for streaming services. What started as a reasonable small arrangement between two people can quietly expand over years into a much larger group of people with access, most of whom the original account owner has never even met. By the time someone finally checks their active devices, the list can be surprisingly long and largely unfamiliar. Point 2. How to check your streaming accounts. Let us start with streaming services, since this is one of the most common places. Unauthorized access quietly continues for years. Most major streaming platforms, including Netflix, have a settings section that shows exactly which devices are currently signed in, often including the approximate location and the last time each device was active. What I personally think surprises people the first time they check this is just how many devices show up, sometimes far more than they expected. A real-life type of scenario. Someone checks their account settings and finds a device logged in from a city they have never visited, active as recently as a few days ago. This is a clear sign the account is being used by someone outside their household. The safe response here is straightforward. Use the platform's built-in option to sign out of all devices, then change the password immediately afterward so any old shared login stops working. What I personally think is worth pointing out here is that not every unfamiliar device automatically means something malicious. Sometimes it is simply a household member using a device you did not know they had, or an old device you personally forgot about. The point is not to assume the worst immediately, but rather to actually verify each device you see rather than skipping past the list entirely, because checking feels unnecessary. The way I look at it, checking this once is not enough. Making it a habit, maybe once every few months, catches unauthorized use early before it becomes a long-term pattern. There is a distinction worth making here that I think gets lost in most advice on this topic. There is a real difference between someone you knowingly and currently share access with and someone who was granted access at some point in the past and simply never lost it. In my opinion, the second category is where most of the actual risk lies, not because anyone had bad intentions, but because forgotten access rarely gets revisited until something forces the issue, like a price increase leading you to actually look closely at who is on the account. Point 3. How to check your email account. Now let us talk about email, which I think deserves extra attention because of how much sensitive information flows through it. What most people underestimate about email security is that most major providers keep a detailed activity log showing recent access, including the approximate device type, browser, and general location of each login. This feature is usually labeled something like account activity or security, and it is worth checking directly rather than assuming everything is fine. Here is a real-life type of example. Someone reviews their email activity log and notices a login from a device type they do not own, at a time they were definitely not using their email. This does not always mean something was stolen or deleted. Sometimes the unauthorized access is just someone reading emails quietly in the background, which can be just as serious, especially if that email is connected to banking, shopping, or other sensitive accounts. What I personally think people underestimate most is how much damage can happen just from someone reading your email, even without changing a single thing. Password reset emails, security codes, and personal conversations can all be exposed without you ever noticing a direct change to your inbox. There is a related check I think deserves its own mention, and that is reviewing your email's forwarding and filter settings alongside your login activity. Someone with quiet, unauthorized access sometimes sets up a rule that silently forwards specific incoming messages to another address without ever needing to log in again after the initial access. This means even after you feel confident your login activity looks clean, checking for unfamiliar forwarding rules is a separate step worth taking specifically because it can persist independently of active sessions. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this. Do you think people check their account activity logs often enough? Point 4. How to check social media and other accounts. Social media platforms and most other major online accounts have a similar feature, usually called login activity or active sessions, buried somewhere in the security settings. In my opinion, the reason people rarely check this is simply that it is not something these platforms actively push you toward. It exists, but you generally have to go looking for it yourself. A real-life type of example. Someone checks their social media login activity for the first time in years and finds an active session from a device they sold or gave away a long time ago, one that was never properly logged out before changing hands. What I personally think is a smart habit here is doing a simple account activity check anytime you get a new phone, sell an old device, or end a relationship where devices or passwords may have been shared. These transition points are exactly when old, forgotten access tends to linger the longest. I also want to mention shopping and financial accounts specifically, since they often get overlooked in these conversations compared to social media and streaming. What most people underestimate is that many shopping platforms also keep saved payment methods and shipping addresses that quietly stay accessible to anyone with unauthorized access, long after the original reason for sharing that login has been forgotten. Checking saved payment methods for anything unfamiliar is a quick, worthwhile step alongside reviewing login activity itself. Point 5. The shared password problem nobody talks about. Here is a twist I think deserves its own moment because it does not always feel like a security issue at first. A huge amount of unauthorized account use does not come from hacking at all. It comes from passwords being shared casually, sometimes years ago, and then never fully revoked. In my opinion, this is one of the most underrated privacy risks that exists today precisely because it does not feel like a crime. It feels like a favor between friends or family that simply never got cleaned up. A real-life type of scenario. Someone shares their email password temporarily to help a family member set something up, forgets about it entirely, and years later that same family member still has full, unrestricted access without either person really thinking about it. I do not think this is about being paranoid. I think it is about being prepared, and periodically reviewing who actually still has access to your accounts is a completely reasonable thing to do, even with people you trust. What I personally think makes this especially tricky is that revoking access from someone you know can feel awkward, almost like an accusation, even when your real intention is simply good digital hygiene. The way I look at it, framing this as a routine security update rather than a personal statement about trust makes the conversation far less uncomfortable. Something as simple as mentioning you are doing a general password cleanup across all your accounts normalizes the process without singling anyone out. Point 6. What to do once you find unauthorized access. So you have checked your accounts and found something suspicious. What now? The way I look at it, the first step is always the same across every platform. Use the built-in option to sign out of all devices or end all active sessions. This immediately cuts off access, even before you change anything else. Only after that should you change your password, since changing the password first while a session is still active does not always disconnect that session right away on every platform. What I personally think people should do next is check what that unauthorized access may have exposed. For email, that could mean checking recently sent messages or password reset requests. For streaming or shopping accounts, that could mean checking payment methods or saved addresses for anything unfamiliar. For social media, it means reviewing recent messages and posts. A real-life type of scenario worth mentioning here. Someone finds unauthorized access on their email, changes the password immediately, but does not think to check whether any password reset emails were sent to other accounts during the time the attacker had access. Weeks later, they discover their online banking password was also reset around the same window, something that could have been caught immediately if they had checked their emails, sent, and trash folders as part of the initial cleanup. Safe steps. Sign out of all devices, change your password to something unique for that account, enable two-factor authentication if it is not already active, and review recent activity for anything that needs to be undone. Point 7. Subtle signs that something is off, even without checking logs. Before we talk about building a routine, I want to mention a few subtle, everyday signs that can hint at unauthorized access, even if you have not gone digging through activity logs yet. What most people underestimate is how often these subtle signs get brushed off individually without anyone connecting them together. Recommendations on a streaming service that do not match anything you actually watch, emails in your sent folder you do not remember writing, or notifications about a login from an unfamiliar device that you dismiss as a one-time glitch are all worth paying closer attention to rather than immediately explaining away. In my opinion, the pattern matters more than any single sign on its own. One unfamiliar recommendation might genuinely be nothing, but several small inconsistencies appearing around the same time is exactly the kind of pattern that justifies taking a few minutes to actually check your account activity directly rather than continuing to assume everything is fine. Point 8. Building a simple routine instead of a one-time check. I want to leave you with something practical instead of just a one-time fix. What I personally think works best is treating this like a recurring habit rather than a single event. Pick one day, maybe the first Sunday of every few months, and spend just a few minutes checking login activity across your most important accounts, email, banking, and any account you use daily. In my opinion, this catches problems early, long before they turn into something more serious like identity theft or financial fraud. The way I look at it, this routine does not need to be complicated or time-consuming to be effective. Even a simple checklist, 3 or 4 accounts, a couple minutes each, checked on a regular schedule, catches the vast majority of unauthorized access long before it turns into a bigger problem. It is the consistency that matters far more than the depth of any single check. I would also like to know your opinion. Were you surprised by how many devices or sessions showed up when you last checked, or have you never actually looked before? Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. What most people underestimate is that this entire process, checking login activity, signing out unfamiliar devices, reviewing shared access, takes far less time than dealing with the aftermath of an account that has been misused for months or years without anyone noticing. In my opinion, a few minutes of occasional checking is a small price to pay for the peace of mind of actually knowing who has access to your digital life. If this video helps you understand online safety more clearly, like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief for more simple cybersecurity advice. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below which account you are going to check first after watching this.